Good evening, and thank you for joining us. I'm Winnie McCroy.
And I'm Eileen Stukane.
And as of today, April 22nd, there are 61 days left until the primaries and 194 until Election Day. With the winners inheriting what we hope will be a true post-pandemic New York City, the stakes could not be higher. In January of next year, we'll have a new mayor, comptroller, Manhattan Borough President, Manhattan DA, and a city council member replacing term-limited Corey Johnson, whose District 3 area of coverage includes Chelsea, the Upper West Side, Hell's Kitchen, West Soho, Greenwich Village, Hudson Yards, and Times Square.
The winner will follow in the footsteps of their immediate predecessors, Corey Johnson and Christine Quinn, both of whom served as council speaker. As if that weren't enough to live up to, history will remember our new council member as the first to serve a full term as New York and the world enters the post-pandemic period. So who is the candidate best suited for this rare chance to be an architect of the new normal? In alphabetical order, the candidates are Leslie Boghosian Murphy, Erik Bottcher, Phelan Dante Fitzpatrick, Marni Halasa, Aleta LaFargue, and Arthur Schwartz.
And we thank these 6 candidates for being here tonight as Chelsea Community News, in partnership with Citizens Committee for New York City, presents Post-Pandemic NYC, Now and Then.
Not a debate or a forum or a town hall, but a back and forth between moderator and candidate, meant to give voters new insights into their leadership style, vision for the future, and ability to work with others for effective and lasting change. There will be group and individual questions. Candidates will be told by off-camera signal how they're doing on time and when time is up, at which point they're on the honor system to finish their thought and stop talking. Likewise, we're on the honor system not to press the mute button. In order to give thoughtful responses, the candidates have received tonight's questions in advance, with the exception of the yes/no lightning round. The first question will be answered in alphabetical order, after which the order will be determined by the use of a randomizer.
So that's our structure. And now for the scenario. Congratulations, candidates. After campaigning during a pandemic and taking part in many online forums, you have been elected District 3 City Council member. 4 years later, you win a second term. That's nearly a decade spent helping New York City emerge from the pandemic era, which inspired our first question, for which each candidate will have 3 minutes to answer. Our first candidate is Leslie Boghosian Murphy. Born and raised in the tri-state area, Boghosian Murphy has lived in Hell's Kitchen for more than 17 years with her husband, Paul, daughter, Cecilia, and their rescue pup, Bailey. A third-generation New Yorker, she's the granddaughter of Armenian immigrants who fled genocide and settled in this area. Her work experience began behind the counter of her family's cheese shop when she was just a child. But her 20-plus year career as an investigative journalist culminated with an Emmy win for her coverage of the Harlem Little League. Boghosian Murphy currently serves as an executive member of Community Board 4, the district's Budget Task Force, and Hudson River Parks Piers 40 and 76 Task Force. She's also an active member of her local NYPD Community Council. Hell's Kitchen, Chelsea, and the West Village are the most diverse and welcoming neighborhoods in the city, says Boghosian Murphy, who notes she's the candidate who has the forward-thinking, get-it-done mindset our district needs. Candidate Boghosian Murphy, the question is, what qualities and abilities make you the right person to represent District 3 in the post-pandemic era, and what actions have you been taking to show voters who you are? You have 3 minutes to reply.
Well, thank you for that introduction. I am very motivated, really, by unfair and unjust treatment, and it's really what has inspired me to run. In talking to so many of my neighbors, especially since COVID, I have heard their stories and I really feel their frustrations. Even before the pandemic, lots of New Yorkers were not being heard or were being counted out and ignored. And it just doesn't sit well with me. And I believe we have an opportunity right now to remake this city into a better place than it was before. And I'm not scared of a challenge. I am a problem solver. And I believe in taking a community-first approach to issues, which really means soliciting people's opinions. So listen, there are always going to be the loudest voices in the room who seek you out as a city council member to let you know what's important to them. And I am happy to talk to those people, of course, but I am also interested in finding more ways to engage the folks who don't always reach out, who aren't sure their opinions matter. And that's what I've been doing so far. Listening, engaging, asking future constituents what they need. What were they experiencing before the pandemic and what have they seen now? So I am showing by doing that, I will always lead based on what's really happening on the ground rather than based in ideology. And I am not afraid to engage with people who disagree with me. Listen, we live in New York City. That's bound to happen, right? So we need to do more to foster conversation and get ideas flowing to really revive our neighborhoods. The upheaval in our city has, I think, has caused a lot of changes. And many of these changes were inflicted by the pandemic, and many have not been for the better. But that same upheaval gives us the opportunity, if we can seize it, to make changes that we do want to see, to take advantage of this moment and work with a bolder, broader plan. We cannot and should not simply return to the before times. So I have a long-term vision for how we can take our city's natural optimism, which is there underneath the sarcasm and the self-deprecation, and build on that and build on the momentum for change to really shape the future we want to see.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Our next candidate is Erik Bottcher. Growing up in a small town in the Adirondack Mountains as the only gay person he knew, Bottcher's personal struggles with depression sparked in him a lifelong dedication to champion progressive causes and help society's most marginalized members. His career in public service began in 2009 as the LGBTQ and HIV/AIDS community liaison at the New York City Council, where he helped develop an initiative against bullying in New York City public schools. In 2011, he worked for New York State, organizing activists in a grassroots campaign to support the Marriage Equality Act. In 2015, Bottcher joined the team of New York City Council member Corey Johnson as his chief of staff, where he worked for better schools, affordable housing, and senior services. Since leaving that position to concentrate on his council run, Bottcher has built a weekly wellness network whose volunteers called homebound seniors and delivered meals to food insecure residents. Additionally, he is organizing weekly community cleanups in the Village, Chelsea, and Hell's Kitchen. So candidate Bottcher, tell the people what qualities and abilities make you the right person to represent District 3 in the post-pandemic era, and what actions have you been taking to show voters who you are? You have 3 minutes.
Thank you so much for having us here tonight. I really appreciate this opportunity. I'm so glad you asked this question. And for me, by far, one of the most rewarding things in my life is the thousands of constituents that I've helped during my 11 years in government. And when young people start in our office doing constituent work, I tell them that you will have people come up to you for years from now, who you may not remember, and thank you for the work that you've done. So constituent work is incredibly hard work, but incredibly rewarding. And that happens to me. People will come up that I might not necessarily recognize and say, you helped me get my health insurance, or you helped me when my landlord was trying to evict me from my apartment. And it's incredibly rewarding, but also it's how you learn how government works. By helping constituents, you learn the inner workings of city and state and federal government. And there's no better way to do it. And that, I think, is going to be incredibly important for our next council member. But I think the best way to know someone's qualities is to look at the support that they have in the community. And I'm so proud of the campaign that we've built. We have the endorsement of hundreds of community leaders, block association presidents, tenant association presidents, both NYCHA tenant association presidents. And We have over 880 individuals have contributed to our campaign. No real estate money, no lobbyists. We got almost 5,000 signatures, 5,000 New Yorkers signed our petition to get me on the ballot. And the support has been overwhelming. And I've even said to people, I'm surprised by how much support we've had, but they say to me, Erik, you've been in the community, you've been doing the work, and you've been there for us, and nothing means more to me than that. And I think these are very important qualities for our next council member to have, and that's why I'm running.
Thanks. Thank you for taking time to recognize your supporters. I know they're going to love that, that to be remembered. Okay, our next candidate question goes to Phelan Dante Fitzpatrick. As a single parent and the operator of 2 small businesses in District 3, Phelan Dante Fitzpatrick says the closing of 3 of his locations and the furloughing of 36 employees taught him firsthand the economic uncertainty of facing working people and the small business community. The well-being of workers that enable business to function is his top priority, he notes, recalling how focusing on their needs gave me a sense of purpose. I felt a kind of awakening. Fitzpatrick says his commitment to justice also comes from being a survivor of gun violence. Fitzpatrick was raised by a single white mom after his father, an openly gay Black man, was murdered in the parking lot of a gay bar in Akron, Ohio. He received this news the day before his 19th birthday. It remains a cold case and informs his commitment to working with community leaders and law enforcement officials to ensure that our community is a vibrant, welcoming, nurturing space for my 3-year-old daughter, my neighbors, and all New Yorkers. I am running to make a difference for District 3. Candidate Fitzpatrick, what qualities and abilities make you the right person to represent District 3 in the post-pandemic era? And what actions have you been taking to show voters who you are? You have 3 minutes.
Thank you so much for the invitation to be here. And thank you to all the other candidates for taking the time. There's been so many, and I'm so appreciative. Despite the hardships I've faced throughout my life or this past year, like being unemployed, like so many others, trying to decide whether to pay for rent or buy groceries, worrying about my family who lives far away, closing my storefronts, and having to lay off employees. I've also felt tremendous pride in my accomplishments. Spending time with my daughter, getting through remote learning, which is, we all know, been very difficult, keeping her safe, all the while running for office. To show her that despite her dad only having a high school degree, that anyone can make a difference and work hard to better their community if they care enough. I don't have the privilege of not having a job or to stop working. So, this experience has been life-altering, difficult, and wonderful. And win or lose, has really helped define who I am and what I can accomplish in my city home. That's been hit really hard by the pandemic, not just by the viral pandemic, but a pandemic of apathy, racism, and neglect that has infiltrated its way into every aspect of our everyday lives. That being said, I know the difference between what's right and wrong and what's good for the few versus what's good for the many. And I think that now more than ever, everyday citizens have to get involved in the decisions that affect their everyday lives. And the less entrenched that someone is in politics, the better they are in serving their community. Thank you so much again, and to everyone who's attending.
Thank you so much for your candor, Candidate Fitzpatrick.
Next, we welcome Marni Halasa. A resident of Chelsea and Hell's Kitchen for the past 28 years, Halasa says that her unique background as a small business owner, community activist, figure skating coach, and lawyer outside of the established political machine make her the strongest candidate for City Council in 2021. The one-time performance artist who dressed in character as the ethical fiscal fairy to protest economic disparity has shed her costumes but retained her zeal for justice. When protections afforded by the proposed Small Business Jobs Survival Act failed to materialize, forcing the closure of the popular Hell's Kitchen coffee shop she ran with her husband, Halasa became even more committed to social activism. The Small Business Jobs Survival Act continues to languish in the council. But as Halasa says, I am still fighting to save small businesses with the bill, in addition to offering vouchers that would provide substantial rent relief. Halasa has also been a strong and persistent voice against the public-private partnership conversion of NYCHA properties, and says she is running to keep New Yorkers in their homes, keep small business in their spaces, so people have jobs to go back to after the pandemic. Candidate Halasa, what qualities and abilities make you the right person to represent District 3 in the post-pandemic era? And what actions have you been taking to show voters who you are?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for having me. I believe that I'm the right person to lead because I have the district's priorities straight. Creating deeply affordable housing, solving the homelessness crisis, solving the crisis of small business closures and jobs, so we actually can have a city when the pandemic is over. Solving all of this is key to our city's recovery. In addition, I believe I'm the right person to lead because I've been doing the work, organizing tenants, and I am on the right side of history. I've been fighting rental assistance demonstration for the Fulton and Elliott Chelsea public housing tenants for the past 2 years. And, you know, it's been difficult. It seems like our efforts have been met on deaf ears. But just recently, federal judge William Pauley ruled in our favor, basically holding what I've been saying for 2 years, that the tenant protections do not follow NYCHA tenants after their development converts over to RAD. So even though we've been protesting regularly, it seems like no one in the district is listening, so I'm still fighting. But also I believe I'm the right person because I speak truth to power, and I'm not afraid to do so. And when you do that, you give voters a reason to vote for you because you are making a strong case on what you would do differently. I think I am the candidate that is most critical of the current council member, like my Twitter. And actually, I think that's really important to be. You need to be respectfully critical and show how you would take the city in a completely different direction, which I will. The major difference that I would enact is community-driven development led by residents and real community leaders and real stakeholders that had boots on the ground. I would also reintroduce the Small Business Jobs Survival Act. I would put a moratorium on all rezonings, especially during a pandemic. I would repeal mandatory inclusionary housing because it doesn't build genuine affordable housing. But the other thing, I believe I'm the best candidate because I am kind and compassionate, and I will bring that sensibility to the council. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for explaining your ambitious plans and your dedication. Thank you. The next candidate is Aleta LaFargue. Lifelong Hell's Kitchen resident, Aleta LaFargue has been the elected president of the Manhattan Plaza Tenants Association since 2016. She is a community organizer, activist, actress, and champion of the arts who promises to be a fearless advocate for her community. The challenges posed by COVID-19, LaFargue says, have pulled back the veil on so many of our city's problems, starting with an egregious lack of mental health and overall healthcare services. She plans to bring the healthcare needs of District 3 to the forefront, as she did when she worked alongside her mother to create the Manhattan Plaza AIDS Project in the 1980s. And as a public school parent who has seen, as she says, the disastrous results of our city's mismanagement of our education system during COVID-19, education is a top priority for her. She also advocates for a living wage for all New Yorkers through a universal basic income program that would be funded by a pied-à-terre tax plan, I should say. Candidate LaFargue, what qualities and abilities make you the right person to represent District 3 in the post-pandemic era? And what actions have you been taking to show voters who you are?
Thank you so much for that introduction. You reminded me I'm actually missing a PTA meeting right now, so I feel a little bad, but I'm glad to be here with you all. So as you mentioned, I've been serving as the tenant president for a 3,500 tenant population for the past 5 years. And I've learned countless lessons on how to support and advocate for my community. In early 2020, when COVID-19 was still just a rumor, my team and I had bi-weekly meeting sessions with our management company and policy committees. And together we created a comprehensive COVID response that the city could not. And we provided over 1,000 vaccines, our 65% senior population here in our building. We also provided on-site testing. And we worked with, for instance, local groceries to hold senior shopping hours. We created an army of volunteers who helped our most vulnerable neighbors with the myriad issues that they were facing during the quarantine. I will engage with communities instead of bureaucrats to determine their needs and help to facilitate programming that suits their needs, which I've done for years here at Manhattan Plaza. I will hold listening tours consistently throughout the neighborhoods. Accessibility and accountability are the two things that I have provided for my residents over the last 5 years. And I've been reelected because of that. I've learned to listen and assess the needs of my community firsthand. And I am prepared to bring that knowledge to the city council.
Thank you. Thank you for reminding us of the importance of community and community organizing. Now, next, we welcome Arthur Schwartz. Activist and lawyer, Arthur Schwartz has lived in Greenwich Village for 40 years, where he and his wife have raised and are still raising 4 children. Schwartz sees a need for, as he says, leaders rooted in their communities who have proven track records of fighting for justice and winning. And Schwartz has done so in court. He successfully litigated to keep the nonprofit station WBAI on the air, and he sued to stop the closure of Beth Israel Hospital. He has served as counsel to over 40 unions, including the Utility Workers Union at Con Edison and the Transport Workers Union Local 100. He has also represented thousands of workers in discrimination, wage theft, and unfair termination cases. His local leadership position includes 23 years as a member of Community Board 2, and as Greenwich Village Male District Leader, he served from 1995 to 2005 and 2013 through the present. A co-founder of Friends of Hudson River Park, the creation and preservation of green space will be an important component of his work as a council member. Candidate Schwartz, what qualities and abilities make you the right person to represent District 3 in the post-pandemic era? And what actions have you been taking to show voters who you are? I can't hear. Can we hear?
Yes. Okay. I didn't unmute. I apologize. I believe that my qualities can be described as someone who's passionate, someone who's tenacious, and somebody who's never been afraid to challenge the establishment, wrongdoers, or people in authority. It began when I was a high school student, when I participated in sit-ins at the Bronx High School of Science. I got arrested 3 times at anti-war demonstrations. Back when my kids were playing in a dirty, overrun, garbage-strewn playground, I organized parents. And then when my son started playing Little League and there wasn't enough space, I went with parents to the governor, made a deal to use Pier 40 as an athletic field, and then they took it away from us. So I went to court and I beat the governor. And by the time we got done, we not only got the field, but we got the state to pay for it. I have been a corruption fighter for many years in the labor movement. I've taken on some of the worst people in the labor movement, from the Teamsters to District Council 37. I've been a force for democracy in the state. Last year, I went to court to get the New York State presidential primary reinstated, and I represent lots of people in fighting for their rights to vote, the right to run for office. I am a force for true community input into decision making, whether it be parks or playgrounds, transportation decisions, or zoning. I am somebody, like, for recently, the city decided to cut service on the F train. I went to court representing the Fulton Street Tenants Association and won that F train service back within a week of filing the lawsuit. Disabled people were not able to use the 14th Street stations because there were no elevators. I recently was on the corner of 14th and 6th Avenue with Senator Schumer, announcing a deal with the MTA to install 6 elevators at 14th Street in stations in our district. I am somebody who shows up. I am somebody who meets with people, finds out what their problems are, takes them on, and takes the lead. And I think that quality is something that will be very, very important in this coming period of time as we come out of the pandemic. And that's why I'm running, because I think we need that kind of leadership in the city of New York.
Thank you. Thank you for your tenacity and all you've done.
Okay, so now we've met all of our candidates, and we will now present the same 3 questions to each of you in the order digitally selected by the computer. These 3 questions relate to our quality of life in District 3, and each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond. Our first group question goes to candidate Fitzpatrick. The question is this: District 3 includes Times Square in the theater district, 45 schools, a large percentage of the more than 10,000 restaurants in Manhattan, big businesses such as Google, small businesses, Port Authority, NYCHA, and housing complexes such as Penn South, as well as new office buildings that offer the possibility of conversions. What will be your legislative priorities when it comes to getting New York City, specifically District 3, up and running post-pandemic? You have 2 minutes.
Good question. Our campaign strongly endorses Invest in Our New York, and we're really pleased with the increased wealth tax rates proposed for New York State. You know, the tax on the uber rich will help our city and our district really make the steps towards much needed development that it needs. And it's really going to help small business recovery, specifically in District 3, which we desperately need. We just need to make sure that the money is going to go where it's supposed to go. You know, big business has only gotten bigger throughout the pandemic, whilst local smaller businesses have suffered, like mine, at the hands of poor leadership and nepotism. We really need to, we intend fully to pass the SBJSA, which really addresses the root causes of businesses in operation for more than 5 years, and will create a minimum 10-year lease with the right for renewal, equal negotiation terms, and restrictions on raising property taxes. And we need to continue to put pressure on raising the minimum wage. So that's really in step with inflation, increased costs of goods and services. And it's really just enough for every single New Yorker to live on. That and preventing people from getting kicked out of their apartments, and businesses from losing their leases so they can stay in the business. And that's those are really big steps. And we feel confident that we're going to be able to accomplish all of those things.
Thank you. Thanks for bringing your small business acumen to the question.
Yeah.
Candidate LaFargue, what will be your legislative priorities when it comes to getting New York City's District 3 up and running post-pandemic?
Well, something I'm very excited about would be a commercial rent stabilization. We need to create commercial rent guidelines, a commercial rent guidelines board to set reasonable limits on rent increases from year to year. I mean, out of control rent increases over the last decade have driven many businesses, including performance spaces, rehearsal venues, et cetera, out of business and displaced others over and over. I also support the Climate and Community Investment Act that would raise $15 billion per year from corporate polluters and use that to create good green jobs, invest in frontline communities, and build a renewable energy economy. I'm also very passionate about regulating the NYPD by fully funding and honoring decisions coming from the CCRB, ending immunity once and for all, making civil suits be paid out of police pensions as opposed to taxpayer dollars. I'd also like to work with the comptroller and the Committee on Contracts to demand accountability for contracts awarded to service providers, specifically for homeless shelters and the Department of Transportation. Also with land use and affordable housing, we need to close the gap on income bands. I mean, right now we have extremely low income, and then there's a hole where people fall out because they're not income eligible. Recently people have been denied mortgages because their incomes went down during this past year, but we have to consider the effects of the pandemic on people's incomes when they're being considered for mortgages and loans. We can't use the same measuring stick as we used to in normal times. We also need to keep the EDC and the
that you mentioned a number of legislative priorities. Is there any one or two that you would fight for, like right out of the box? Is there anything that's closest to your heart?
Right now we have an extreme homeless crisis, and I really think that there's a lot of money going into supporting the contracts that are running homeless shelters, but it seems they're not providing the services that they have been given money to provide. So we need to find out why that's happening and keep them accountable. So that's a priority for me.
Interesting.
Great, thank you.
Candidate Bottcher, you are up next. The question, which you have 2 minutes to reply to, is what will your legislative priorities for District 3 be post-pandemic?
Well, to get District 3 up and running, and if we're going to recover economically, we've got to retain the businesses and residents we have, and we have to attract new residents and businesses and tourists back to our city. And our government really needs to focus on the basic quality of life and public safety issues facing our city that make New York City a livable place. If you have garbage overflowing out of cans on every corner, and if the street is strewn with garbage when you walk out your front door, you are not going to stay here if you have a choice. You're certainly not going to live here or want to work here or visit here. So I put out a sanitation plan. We call it Clean District 3. You can find it on our website. And among the recommendations are the creation of borough-wide strike teams that will be able to respond to sanitation 311 calls in real time, rather than letting garbage sit there for days. That's something that I'm going to move to implement right out of the box. Another big part of getting New York City up and running means getting the community-based programs that our community depends upon up and running again. Greenwich House Senior Center, Encore Senior Center, our after-school programs, all the social service agencies that serve the most vulnerable residents in our community. I know every one of these programs. I know the folks who run them and the clients of these programs, and I'm going to ensure that they have what they need, the funding that they need, the support that they need from the future mayoral administration, who probably will not know them. That's going to be a top priority of mine. The theme of our campaign is New York City's best days ahead. It's going to be a rocky road. I really believe that our best days are ahead, but it's going to be a tough road for us to get there, and we got to make smart decisions.
Mm-hmm. And Erik, is this the quality of life around garbage one of the reasons that prompted you to run these weekly cleanups? I don't see too many people volunteering their weekends to clean up trash on a random street, but you seem to.
There's actually been an incredible movement of folks around the city doing cleanups. There's a woman in Hell's Kitchen named Katie Savage, and this has been such an interesting time because people who are in totally different industries are learning new things about themselves. Katie was in fashion, and she started just picking up trash, and it picked up steam. So she's been doing an amazing cleanup in Hell's Kitchen every weekend. I created it in the Village and Chelsea, and in Hell's Kitchen, we started planting the medians on 9th Avenue. So if you're on 9th Avenue, you'll be able to see some of the plantings we've done. But it's just another example of New Yorkers stepping up around the city when times are tough.
That's great. Thank you so much. Okay, next up, we have candidate Boghosian Murphy. The question turns to you. Basically, what will be your legislative priorities when it comes to getting New York City's District 3 up and running post-pandemic? You have 2 minutes for your reply.
So I've said that since the beginning of this race, and I've been consistent, COVID recovery is my biggest legislative priority. And one of the primary reasons really I'm running, I often talk about that COVID recovery, that is, in relation to small business revival and rethinking our education system. But it really ties into my other top priorities: affordable housing, education, and climate justice as well. As this question mentions, District 3 is inextricably linked to tourism. We need to be doing all we can to ensure, when it's safe to travel again, that New York is a place that people want to return to. And that means thinking about ways to support our artists and the arts community, helping traditional theater and concert spaces make any changes that are dictated by public health to open up again as soon as it's safe to do so. We have to create a safe and clean environment so people want to walk our streets, eat at our restaurants, and shop in our stores again. A voter said to me the other day, what did she say? We need to offer small businesses a helping hand, not a slapping hand. And I really thought that point was well taken. As a council member, I would want my office to be a place where small business owners and artists could come and we can help them through their paperwork, their permit processes, so they aren't hit with these fees and fines they don't expect, which really can be crippling to those groups of people. And to come out of COVID recovery, we need to ease those a little bit. We also need to take this opportunity to truly look at how New York City can be a leader in green energy and infrastructure, in providing dignified housing to more residents. The vibrancy really of urban outdoor green areas and green spaces is always going to be a big draw, and we should be making a major push to incorporate best practices climate policy really in every piece of legislation we draft, in order to truly bring New York on par with other world-class cities. And I'm not just saying that because it's Earth Day. I've been saying it throughout. And finally, my last point would be we need to recommit to keep people in their homes to begin with. Getting price out of one neighborhood often means relocating to another, and that gentrifies and prices out the people who have been living them previously. So, the big picture reality contributing to our current homelessness crisis, and it's exacerbated by this tendency to basically give away land to huge developers as long as they throw us a bone with a tiny number of affordable housing units that many New Yorkers don't qualify for anyway.
Well said. Eileen?
Yes. Candidate Schwartz, what will be your legislative priorities for getting District 3 up and running post-pandemic?
The first thing that I want to deal with is the rent crisis. A lot of people haven't paid their rents. The state of New York has enacted this incredible multi-billion-dollar program to help people pay their rents. But tenants are continuing. I just got 3 calls today from people who are getting letters from their landlords. So my first priority would be to help tenants navigate getting the grants from the state to pay their landlords back their rents, and that includes small businesses. Second, I want to see not only the Small Business Jobs Revival Act passed, I want to see commercial rent control, not rent stabilization, commercial rent control. We have to keep our small businesses alive and not be replaced by CVS's, Duane Reade's, and Costco's. I want to see a city version of the PPP program for small businesses. The PPP program that the federal government ran was geared towards companies with employees. Small businesses, and it was also geared to payroll. Small businesses often have single people running their store. Restaurants don't have very large payrolls. I want to have a program in this city that's geared towards small businesses who don't have large payrolls, and particularly focused in our district on the small theaters and theater companies and arts centers that basically have been forced to close because of the pandemic. I want to see the state's affordable housing money that they also passed in the last budget put into converting unused vacant hotels and office spaces into housing. And one of my priorities, I want buses to be free like they were last year. And I want to say no to the Port Authority multi-story tower building plan, and same with the one that the governor wants to put up around Madison Square Garden.
Thank you. I have just a couple of small questions. When you talk about the rent crisis and the grants to pay landlords, do you think that eviction should be extended through 2022?
Yes.
Yes, I think with this program that the state put into effect, where there is money that people can get to pay their landlords the rent, because I think most landlords in New York are small landlords. They need that rent money. Most owners of small commercial properties need the rent from their tenants. There is a program to get it into place. We should stop all evictions and then make sure the money is flowing in the right direction.
Okay, thank you. And also one more, when you talk about the difference between commercial rent control and stabilization, just for the people for our voters watching, why do you say rent control is better than stabilization?
Well, to me, a rent control program is one where rents cannot go up, and they just can't go up, and stores cannot be kicked out like the old rent control program that we had here in New York City. When the Small Business Job Survival Act came, a lot of the commercial business interests were saying, "Oh, this is a form of rent control in New York City." We need it. We need strict limits on how high rents can be, not just a fair bargaining field, because there is no fair negotiation between landlords and tenants in this economy. It needs to be strictly controlled so that stores and businesses are not pushed out by rent increases.
Okay, thank you very much. Our next candidate is candidate Halasa. What will be your legislative priorities when it comes to getting District 3 up and running post-pandemic?
Okay, so my first priority would be, like people are mentioning, the Small Business Job Survival Act. That will save the small businesses and the jobs they create. For our economic recovery. Small businesses are actually the major revenue generator of income for the city. And they also create the jobs anywhere between 55% and 65%. Some people say it's even more. So small businesses need a long-term affordable lease. I also agree with canceling the rent for small businesses and tenants hit hard by the pandemic. But actually, I would say that the SBJSA is actually better than the commercial rent stabilization bill because the small business owner can actually negotiate with their landlord, for a 10-year lease. And if there's not agreement between the two parties, it goes to mandatory arbitration. The problem with the commercial rent stabilization bill is that it has another board with REBNY and EDC, appointees by the mayor. So I really feel like it's kind of rigged. I mean, in theory, I like it in theory, but I feel like because the board, is peppered with like real estate people, I think that's problematic. My second priority would be to create deeply affordable housing. For low-income people, right, by repurposing all the empty buildings in our district. And again, I would save NYCHA. I would stop RAD. I want to fully fund NYCHA and keep it public. But, one of the main issues that I hear when I talk to voters is people really do not like all the gentrification and like the irresponsible development going on in the district. One example was Cuomo's Gateway, the upgrade for Penn Station. He wanted to bring another Hudson Yards, 10 skyscrapers, on top of Penn Station. People don't want that. He also wanted to demolish 2 citywide blocks. Tenants' homes would be demolished, small businesses, and the second oldest Roman Catholic church. And I'm not saying Penn Station is perfect the way it is, but to build skyscrapers is really a giveaway to luxury development. And also just the issue of secondary gentrification. I always bring up the bar of the Half King. The Highline moved in, their rent tripled, and then they were gone. So I think that's another thing that we really need to think about. And sometimes it's hard to quantify, but when the businesses all die off because, luxury development is being built, that's a real problem.
So you would create specific legislation that relates to gentrification and
secondary
limiting gentrification then?
Yes, because I think secondary gentrification happens all the time. We all know it when we see it. The businesses close, the rents go up and, people are displaced. So that's something that I definitely want to tackle, because I feel like, often it's been being treated like it's so amorphous, but it's actually a real thing that happens that we have to stop.
Very interesting. Well, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Candidate Halasa. And now for our second group question. Candidate Schwartz, you are first to answer the second group question. Last month, the City Council voted to end qualified immunity for the NYPD, a practice which has made filing a civil lawsuit against a government official who is performing his or her official duties extremely difficult. Will you propose any changes to the funding of the NYPD?
All right, I'm going to just put it on my lawyer head. I don't understand what the city council had to do with qualified immunity, since it's a federal court concept that when people sue under the federal civil rights laws, I think it's a good idea, but it's going to be up to Congress to do that, and not the city. But
okay. Thank you.
But with respect to the, can you hear me?
Yes. But will you propose any changes to the funding of the NYPD?
Okay, so right now, last year in the budget, the NYPD got about 10.5 million, somewhere between 9.5 and 10.5 billion dollars, which was $1 out of $10 more than that of our budget. I think first you start by reimagining the NYPD. You take them out of all mental health situations. You get rid of all the civilian jobs that these uniformed officers are doing. You take them away from traffic accident investigations, and in fact, I think you take them away from traffic enforcement. I think we could institute an early retirement plan to reduce the number of police officers in the city, and then we could take $3 billion out of that budget if we instituted those changes and put that money into other programs, which I will discuss when you ask another question later today.
Okay.
Okay, Candidate Bottcher, the question turns to you. Will you propose any changes to the funding of the NYPD? You have 2 minutes to reply.
Yeah, and I want to frame the answer this way. We are in the middle of a historic movement for racial justice, and we have to make sure that what we've been experiencing this past year with people all over the country crying out for reform is not just a flash in the pan. We can't go back to the way things have always been. We need reform. No, I don't support spending less money on public safety. What I do support is reallocating funds to other tools in the toolbox that can achieve public safety, like teen programs, substance use programs, mental health programs, because I've seen firsthand on the streets of our district, we cannot arrest our way out of many of these problems. We need programs to really get to the root of these problems. Also, like Arthur said, the police are currently asked to do a lot of things that they shouldn't do and don't want to do, quite frankly, responding to mental health crises. We need to move those functions out of the NYPD, but when we do it, we really have to have those programs up and running so there's not a vacuum in the services. Now, I have a great relationship with our local precincts, the 1st, the 6th, the 10th, the 13th, the Midtown North, Midtown South. I believe that we can do these things without compromising public safety. I reject the false choice between reform and public safety. We have to have reform and ensure public safety, and I believe we can do it.
Thank you.
Candidate Halasa, will you propose any changes to the funding of the NYPD?
Yes, I would. And just to go back, the George Floyd verdict, that was correct, and we should celebrate that. But in the wake of that, more Black men and women and young people are being murdered, and nothing fundamentally has really changed. And ProPublica actually did a very interesting article. There's a similar case in the Bronx that involved a Black gay dancer who was killed by a white officer, and his family never got relief. And then NYPD refused to give body cam footage to the CCRB, and it's still left in the hands of the police commissioner that always gets the final say. And this is sort of the typical situation. So I see the NYPD as actually, from, what they did last year, beating up peaceful protesters, the murders going on. I see them as an untrustworthy organization, and I believe that we sort of need to take matters in our own hands. So the first thing I would do is definitely demilitarize the police. Kettling should be banned. Also, I would defund the police's budget. Their budget is, like Arthur was saying, like almost like $11 billion. There's a huge amount of overtime spent. Our city can't afford it anymore. We needed to take a lot of that money and refund it to communities of color, for summer youth programs, for education. Also, I believe take the NYP out of traffic, out of homeless outreach, out of minor disputes. We need more public safety officers, on a beat. And also, I believe there should be a 3 strikes and you're fired. If there are 3 substantiated complaints of the NYPD for violence, they should be fired. And also with the CCRB or the ECRB, we have to take the final say of the police commissioner, the final say out of the police commissioner's hands. But I actually would add another layer of accountability. In addition to the ECRB, I would propose creating a public commission to investigate NYPD corruption and misconduct, like the NAP or the Mullen commissions. And this, I'm kind of proposing something interesting. The commission could make arrests, subpoena witnesses, perform its own investigations, and prosecute its own cases. And it's never been done before, but if a public commission could have real prosecutorial power, I think that would add another layer of accountability.
I see. Would you propose that as a council?
I would. I definitely would. Because I think, I think what all of us are seeing is there's all these policies and, and then nothing ever changes. So is policy enough to stop, when there is this culture of white supremacy in the police department, across the nation? So that's my concern.
Okay,
I wonder if policy is enough. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you. Candidate LaFargue, will you propose any changes to the funding of the NYPD?
Absolutely, yes. As a woman of color raising a little brown in the city, what's gone on this year has, my entire life I've grown up around the notion that people of color are disproportionately targeted by the police. But that does not mean that they're not looking to be protected by the police. So here in our community, I've been working all summer long with our precincts to bring them in to the community, let them get to know us, let us get to know them, because we need to get to a space of a community policing model where we have the cops walking the beat, keeping the streets safe. But I agree with the rest of the candidates that they should not be responding to mental health crises. They should not be in our schools. We do need to drastically defund the militarization of the police. We should fully fund, and like I said earlier, and honor the CCRB. And again, as I said before, maybe if we require the police to pay their own civil suits and not just assume taxpayers will do it, they would think before acting with impunity. So, Marni mentioned the verdict, which was wonderful. but it wasn't, 10 minutes before a little girl was killed by the police, who in fact was calling for their protection. Luckily, this didn't happen in our city, and the police that I've met with across our city are largely people of color themselves, but it's people in positions of power above them in the higher positions that tend to be white people. And so I support hiring more women and more people of color to have those higher positions, because they're the ones calling the shots and telling the cops what to do. In general, the police are taking orders. So that's how I feel about it.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Candidate Fitzpatrick, the question goes to you now. Will you propose any changes to the funding of the NYPD?
As a Black gay man, I would just like to remind anyone watching this that in August, the president of the New York City PBA, the largest police union in the country, endorsed Trump and Trumpism. And the former head of the NYPD's Equal Opportunity Division was outed as an active white supremacist. So let's not pretend that racism, anti-Semitism, homophobia, transphobia doesn't exist in law enforcement in New York City, because we all know that it does. And where have the mayor and the New York City Council been in our fight for equal protection under the law? Well, nowhere, because they all love the endorsement and the generosity of the NYPD. In fact, I think that Erik has quite a few. But the people have spoken in New York City, in all across the country, that the time for policy and politics and politicians that protect the status quo and the systems of governance that is built to maintain inequity is over. So yeah, I propose a cohesive and long overdue reimagining of the budget. A significant subtraction of the operating budget of the NYPD will not, I repeat, will not inhibit them from performing their duties, but will, in the decades-long slush fund that they've had at their disposal. And I'm strongly for dissolving the Vice Department and removing officers from inside public schools, which we all know perpetuates the school-to-prison pipeline, and redirecting those funds back to the schools where they belong. Look, this isn't simply just reducing the budget of an organization that is overburdened and misused. We now have the opportunity to engage the funding in the community development that's required to lift up working New Yorkers in this district, and to end the dehumanizing effects of generational poverty at the same time, which is perpetuated by racist developmental practices and exacerbated by racist policing practices. And we need to invest in education and job training, post-incarceration support, which we currently have none of. And we need to invest in public spaces, trees, and community health. And we need to invest in the well-being and safety of New Yorkers. This is how we make our communities and cities safe, not through a close to $10 billion budget for a military police force. And redistribution of resources helps the NYPD achieve its mission.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned at the beginning NYPD endorsements. Do you think that police department endorsements should stop for candidates? Is that something that you are not in favor of?
I mean, look, if candidates are comfortable getting endorsements from the NYPD after they have shown, especially with the PBA, that the potential for racism and anti-Semitism and transphobia and homophobia exist within those domains, then good for them. I'm glad that some candidates feel safe with more policing on the street, but I don't think that's what New Yorkers want. And I think this false narrative, as Erik was saying, is really between safe streets and bloated police budgets, which it's just not true.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the question now turns to candidate Boghosian Murphy. Wrapping up this second question, will you propose any changes to the funding of the NYPD? You have 2 minutes to reply.
Yes. So I think really to make serious cuts in the NYPD budget, I mean serious cuts, we first have to untangle the responsibilities now under the purview of the police department, which seems to be just about everything when you call 911. Policing should be limited to matters of public safety, period. Transferring oversight of homeless services, for example, will both reduce the budget and I believe would provide a more proper response. And I'll give you an example. So last year, NYC estimated 911 received one mental health related call for every 3 minutes. Every 3 minutes, 911 got this call. So who is responding to those mental health calls when someone's calling 911? The police. Mental health professionals and crisis workers should be dispatched through 911 for mental health emergencies. And that's how we move the budget. We get the money out of NYPD, and at the same time, we provide a better response. The 911 component, I keep mentioning because I think it's a very important one, because until now, people have been directed, unless it's an immediate violent episode, to call 311, and 311 is not an immediate response platform. So certain bad situations were not remedied. I will give you another very specific example. I would like to see the expansion of speed cameras, both the use and location. And this will kill two birds with one stone. It will eliminate bias stops and the potential for confrontation. It takes biasness out of policing, and quite frankly, it takes policing out of policing. And number two, by the way, it's actually a pretty good deterrent. When you get that ticket in the mail and you look at where the picture was taken, you remember, and you're more careful next time. And once you make these cuts, you make these little cuts here and there, it's gonna start downsizing the NYPD. Because as we move the responsibilities of addressing societal problems away from police, we will start to see a reduction in headcount, which will automatically reduce the staffing budget. But reducing the staff, without reducing responsibility will actually enlarge the NYPD budget. And you're probably like, how is that? Because overtime is one of the biggest chunks of the policing budget. The latest pause on new cadets, which by the way has since restarted, have led to a reduction in neighborhood police services, but it's stretched overtime. So as we transfer responsibility, overtime as well as headcount will decrease. And also what Arthur said, I've been saying actually throughout this whole campaign, we have to have more civilians in the NYPD. And I think that will help go far on community policing, and also, again, getting down the bloated budget.
Great. Thank you so much. I know these speed cameras have been very popular, especially establishing them in the school zone. So thanks for bringing that up.
Thank you.
We're going to move to our third question, take this third question to our candidates. And it's about the city budget. What do you feel is missing or not being accomplished by the current city budget, and how would you address that gap? The first question goes to candidate Fitzpatrick. You have 2 minutes to answer.
I was disappointed by the 21 budget. You know, Mayor de Blasio and the city council failed to live up to their promises. Gutting public schools to pour money into the NYPD exhibits, you know, where the governor, the mayor, and the Speaker Johnson's priorities lie in conflict with the people. Now, right now, we've got people in office who spend more time politicizing movements and virtue signaling on social media and campaigning for office than actually legislating for real change that could affect hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers. You know, there's never been compromises for the welfare of our city, but decisions made to secure themselves jobs, really, while the rest of us were losing ours. And New Yorkers have had enough of the smoke and mirrors of government, I think. And we also need to stop dancing around the politics of the moment and take action for the people. You know, real solutions for affordable housing, funding mental health and medical professionals to respond to 911 calls. And we need to increase funding for small business operators and reinvest the revenue from wealth and capital gains taxes back into our community. District 3, there's no doubt about it, is the wealthiest district in New York. And with the proper leadership, I think we can see viable change for the immediate future. But we have to put funding towards post-incarceration reentry programs, you know, that focus on helping individuals get back to work, and ending the vicious cycle of recidivism and the resolving prison door. Proper leadership looks like the passage of the Green New Deal for NYCHA and CUNY New Deal and the SBJ SA. Those are real impactful changes and the changes that we need in our community.
Thank you. Candidate Bottcher, the question goes to you next. What gap do you see missing in the city budget?
Sure, I want to focus on a couple things. The program that the de Blasio administration, Shirley McCroy, created to address mental health, Thrive NYC, it needs to change. In 2019, according to the New York Times, only 10% of the $250 million spent every year goes to treat New Yorkers with serious mental illness. And I think that's wrong, and I think it's a big missed opportunity. That money should really be going to help the most vulnerable, the people who need it most. We have people on our streets suffering from untreated mental illness. So I'm going to fight to revamp, rebuild, rebrand that program, Thrive NYC, and direct it to the crisis of serious mental illness in the city. I also want to direct funds to finance the purchase of distressed commercial properties, hotels, office buildings. The city should take this opportunity to purchase these buildings and create permanent, affordable, and supportive housing for the next century. We have to do it now, and we should be using budget funds for that.
Okay. I know that's an industry that is to be tapped, the conversion market. So thank you so much. Eileen?
Yep. Candidate LaFargue, what do you feel is missing from the current city budget that needs addressing as we move into this post-pandemic era?
Well, I'd like to add, along with what the other candidates have already provided, which I fully agree with, I think the city needs independence from the state. We shouldn't be beholden to the governor any longer. I mean, since the majority of tax dollars come from NYC, we should be looking at how those tax dollars are being distributed. We're lucky to have the majority in both the state houses, but in the past, the three men in the room have unevenly negotiated and distributed funds on political merit. We have environmental goals to curb climate change. We need to look at how our budget can help us achieve our carbon emission goals. I want to review how we're funding projects as it relates to housing and green spaces. I'd like to put a larger focus on the Committee on Contracts. I'm always a proponent for giving a lot more money to the schools, and specifically to the schools who need it. So I think it's important that we have oversight on specific schools and not just blanketly handing out funds to schools that may be well funded by their PTAs, for instance. And I agree, mental illness is one of our biggest issues, and we've seen it multiply over this pandemic. We had 2 suicides within 4 months in the building where I live. So it really hits home for me personally, and we need to find ways to take care of people.
So you feel that the current city budget doesn't provide enough for mental health care?
I think that there's a lot of money going towards these things, but it's not actually happening. Agencies are receiving the funding, but again, I go back to accountability. And these agencies need a report card, just like my 7-year-old gets, maybe quarterly. So if we have a review board that's going in and saying, can we quantify the spending of this money? Can we see results? As opposed to just giving the money and seeing the same thing multiplying over and over.
I see. Okay, thank you. Candidate Halasa, what do you feel is missing or not being accomplished by the current city budget that you would like to address?
Right. Well, just to follow up what Phelan was saying, we need to elect a brand new slew of leaders to do the people's will. Many of these elected officials are not doing what the public wants, and the voters are tired of it. And the public is really paying attention. That's what I hear also when I talk to voters. And just an example of that, just recently in the budget, the mayor gave real estate developers like Vornado, Excel, Rock Rose, Related, and the Rudin Management Company discounts on property taxes and a backdoor financial bailout. And the public is left holding the bag. And this is a problem. That's $2.5 billion. Well, NYCHA needs that. NYCHA needs $3 billion in order to fix the boilers. Schools need that. Hospitals need that. Affordable housing needs this. So this is a real problem, and this happens over and over, and there's got to be some kind of accountability. And, right now, I mean, I'm running for office, but how can I'm not sure what I can do, but at least I'm thinking about it, Also, there's a lot of waste. Eliminate the high-priced consultants from the budget. Last year, the mayor added all these assistants instead of keeping the city's EMS workers. That was like a bad decision. And also just in general, it seems like the city, the pandemic occurred, and it seems like the city is always waiting for the money from the federal government. And, the federal government packages are a start, but it's never really enough. And even the rollout of the funds is problematic. So I feel like we need to figure out, other funding streams to accommodate this. Obviously we've talked about cutting the NYPD's $11 billion budget. I would propose a data tax on Google and Facebook because they use our public information for free. That should be a 2% tax. What about proposing a 1% tax on corporations' corporate income taxes? They wouldn't even miss it. The pet-a-terre tax, residential parking tax, and also just big picture wise, the developers, the landlords own the air above their buildings and they sell it. Like, why do they own air? It just seems like if the city could actually, from now on, use those air rights, create a fund, for housing, it's something to think about, because I think the air is public, it's like land, water, and air. These are public assets. So I would say that we should start thinking along those lines.
Well, thank you. Thank you for all those new ideas.
Great. The question goes to candidate Boghosian Murphy. What do you feel is missing or not being accomplished by the city budget, and how would you address that gap?
So my platform, as I said before, focuses on COVID recovery for small businesses and education. Number one. Number two, affordable housing. And number three, climate justice. So it's safe to say that those are the areas for me, I think, have been neglected in the city budget, and we need to concentrate more on, especially on climate justice infrastructure, which I'll talk about a little bit later, I think. But we need to invest in our small business owners, in our students and educators, and in long-term thoughtful housing and climate solutions. So how are we going to do that? There are a number of ways to raise funds for the city that I've been touting throughout my campaign. I'm a fan of looking into the land value tax, which discourages vacant and underutilized space by taxing the value of the land itself, rather than just what's built upon it. Right now, whether what something's tax value is what the building is. But we have the most valuable land in pretty much all the world in Manhattan. So I think we should look at the land value tax. And that will also actually promote less blight in neighborhoods. I am also very interested in creating a pilot program, which is a payment in lieu of taxes program. What that is universities do not pay property tax due to their tax exempt status. Yet some of these institutions have endowments in the billions. Columbia, for example, has an $11.2 billion endowment. By the way, that actually went up this year during COVID, while our community colleges, their money and budgets have been plummeting. So this is not a set fee or another form of tax. It's actually a mutually agreed upon amount between the institution and the local government. And really, I do not know why City Council has not acted on this yet. Among the 8 Ivy League schools, only Penn and Columbia currently do not have a pilot program agreement in place with their local government. And this is what's going to help fund public schools like it does in Boston, like it does in other parts of the country. I also want the city to stop the practice of giant tax giveaways to developers. Oversight is one of the City Council's biggest resource. And there has been a culture of waste and cronyism for a long time that has dictated city contracts. This is the benefit of being a political outsider when you take office. I don't owe anyone anything. I don't owe anyone anything. So I can look at a project and processes with an objective eye and say, that doesn't make sense. Let's find a more efficient way to do X so we also have the funding to do Y. And let's keep monitoring X so it doesn't go drastically over its timeline and over its budget, as we have seen time and time again. So I guess I would say if you have the political will to do it, that can be very, very effective.
Thank you so much. Your comments on the pilot program were very illuminating. Eileen?
Yep. Candidate Schwartz, what do you feel is missing or not being accomplished by the current city budget, and how would you address that gap?
So, when you ask a budget question, and I try to answer the question you're asking. So I took a look at the budget, right? I took a look at the actual document, but by the way, which we have to deal with tax money that's set by the taxes are all set by the state. Unfortunately, a horrible situation we're in with the state constitution. So there are two budgets in New York City. There's a capital budget. So I want the capital budget to include dollars for building affordable housing, not using the mandatory inclusionary housing program to build affordable housing. Maya Wiley has proposed $10 billion over 4 years in a capital budget program. That's one thing I want to see. That involves both building new housing and converting closed commercial spaces, hotels, and turning them into housing. I want to see a lot of money in the capital budget for school construction. School class sizes are too large, and the way to deal with that is to add more spaces for schools. And again, that can both involve building new buildings. It could also involve reconversion or conversion of existing commercial spaces that aren't being used. And the third part of the capital budget that I have very strong feelings about is I don't want any dollars to go into burying East River Park. I'm part of that movement to stop the burial of East River Park. They want to spend $1.2 billion on that. Let's put it into something more worthwhile. In terms of the operating budget, I believe I'm a supporter of the city $1 billion a year into the New York City Transit Authority operating budget. Right now it puts zero. That would allow free buses and lowering the fares. I want $1 billion put into mental health services and local health services like clinics all over the city, not just the places that you can go that require insurance money. I want $500 million put into school counselors to replace cops in the schools. I think if we put school counselors instead of cops in the schools, we would deal with the problems that exist involving safety in the schools in a far more effective way. I want another several $1 billion to go into hiring more teachers and to improving air circulation systems and environmental systems in the schools so that the kids can go to school without fear of getting sick. I want to put more city dollars into the programs that exist for converting heating systems in this city that contribute to 70% of the pollution in the city. The city has a program requiring landlords to convert their systems, but they need to put money into it so that smaller buildings can do the same. I want a small thing. I want more money put into tree planting in New York City. Right now, we hire contractors. I want a tree planting corps created. And then finally, I want more money put in. I want a special program in the next year put into revival of small businesses and giving them the funds they need to get back on their feet.
Thank you. Those are all very specific measures, and thank you for bringing them all up. Now we go to individual questions. We have chosen a question for each candidate based upon issues they have highlighted as important to them. Each candidate has 2 minutes to respond. The first question is for candidate LaFargue. The council passed a bill, ultimately supported by the mayor, for an open culture program similar to open restaurants to keep the arts alive in the streets. Is there any other protection that you feel can be created by the city council to keep those who work in New York City arts and theaters afloat? We've seen so much happen now in the pandemic. So much of the arts have been lost.
I appreciate this question. The industry is very near and dear to my heart. I've grown up around people in all forms of the industry. My brother is a sound designer for Broadway shows. My mom's an actress, and so am I. My father's a writer, and I live amongst musicians, dancers, and ushers, and the like. So it really is something very important to me that we support. And I think that open streets is an idea, but we definitely need to do more than that. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I just
Is there anything that the city, that you as a council member in the city council would think about doing to keep theirs or to protect them in the future if there's a crisis?
Well, I think first of all, we should create an impact study to see how the effects of COVID have affected the arts and culture sector, so that we can diagnose where the need is really most acute. I think tax incentives for film and TV to do post-production in New York, which, by the way, does not take up parking spaces. We need to call upon the state to provide clear guidance as to the public health criteria to make reopening decisions. Also, the state and city really needs to provide grants to assist with reopening costs. That's including like PPE and modifications to venues, and to give comprehensive guidelines so we can open safely. And I think that money can come from public and private partnerships. We can create an arts and culture fund that could be sponsored by private developers, maybe. I mean, there's all this money sitting in our city, but I don't see anyone going and asking these guys to give us any. And I think they'd be willing, and I think we should do that more often, especially when it comes to things like the arts, which benefit all of us. And I don't think anyone would disagree that it's such an integral part of our city and such an important piece when it comes to having tourism return and to just keep the soul of our city alive. I mean, that's why people come to New York, right? It's for arts and culture. So we need to do everything we can to bring it back.
Great. Thank you. The next question goes to candidate Schwartz. You have advocated for free bus transportation throughout the city and reduced subway fares, bike lanes on Park Avenue, but you fought against the city banning cars on West 14th Street from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. for bus-only lanes. Is this a contradiction, and what do you see as the best way to promote public transportation?
The first thing I want to do is correct this myth. I wasn't against bus-only lanes.
Okay.
The community, I represented 18 block associations in court, was against a bus-only street, that they turned 14th Street into a bus-only street with no cars.
Okay.
But that the cars were going to go down their blocks, right? And that was what that fight was about. COVID sort of terminated that fight because we have so many fewer cars going around New York City these days, although they could come back. So I don't see a contradiction. But let me talk about public transportation, because that's a big part of what I believe in I want to do as a city council member. And I want to tell you, this weekend, I think on Saturday, I'm going to be outside Manhattan Plaza where Aleta lives, and with a bunch of bus drivers who are going to be handing out flyers for me, talking about my record in support of public transportation. In this city, the city does a survey every year of how people get around the city. And the not last year's, but the 2019 study showed that 40% of people use buses and subways both to go to work and to do most of their trips in the city. 40% walk. It's a big walking city. 17% use cars or for-hire vehicles, and 2% of people use bikes. So that, to me, lays out the priorities that we have to have. Buses and subways, pedestrian walking, and reduce the number of cars. So what do I want to see? I want to see buses made free like they were last year. I want to see congestion pricing put into place. Finally, the feds have approved it. Let's get it going. I want to see lower subway fares, which I talked about, putting more money into the subway fares. I want to see the city reduce the cap on for-hire vehicles. It went over 6 years. It went from 60,000 to 120,000. Now it's frozen at 120. I want that number to go down, because those are the vehicles that spew pollution and hold up the buses in bus lanes that travel around the city. And finally, I want rational bike lanes, not ones where people really to ride their bike have to pass lights and hit people crossing the street. I was the principal supporter on Community Board 2 of creating the Hudson River bike lane that goes down Route 9A. I want to see something like that. I proposed Park Avenue as a place that would have bikes, and the bikes would be able to would come up with a system that would allow people to ride, not have to stop every 2 blocks if they're going to obey signals, but be able to ride effectively north and south in this city. And finally, with respect to 14th Street, I want that restriction changed, not 6 a.m. to 10 p.m., which is ridiculous. It should be during rush hour, and then during the rest of the day. The small businesses need cars to come there, and we who live on the side blocks don't need all that traffic coming down our streets.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Candidate Bottcher, we're going to move on to your individual question. The question is, during the pandemic, a lot of people in District 3 struggled with housing and food insecurity. How do you plan to protect quality of life around these things in post-COVID NYC?
Thank you for raising the issue about food insecurity, because it's something that hasn't garnered a lot of attention in this election cycle at any level, but it's something that a lot of our residents struggle with and have for many years. When last year, this month, when the pandemic hit, the immediate problem we had was that people were homebound, and many of our residents relied on food from soup kitchens and senior centers. So I got together with some neighbors, and we immediately started calling volunteers from around the district. And I reached out to local nonprofits and corporations, and we set up a food distribution network. We delivered over 60,000 pantry boxes, and we called thousands of seniors every week to make sure that they had what they needed. But going forward, we need to make permanent a lot of the food relief efforts that were put into place this last year. There was money allocated to soup kitchens and pantries citywide. That funding stream should be made permanent. Another thing that I want to take on is food waste. 68% of the food waste that is discarded in New York City is still edible. 68% of the food that gets thrown out from supermarkets and restaurants, many of whom are in Council District 3, gets tossed out. So we need a food recapture system, and that's something I'm going to fight for in the city council.
All right. Thank you so much for that. Eileen?
Yep. Candidate Halasa, you have been a strong opponent of any program that might privatize public housing and take rights away from tenants.
Correct.
City officials say the privatization will bring in the funds needed to repair egregiously maintained buildings. How would you end the move to privatize, but still be able to fund the needed improvement of conditions in public housing?
So what's interesting is, well, sure, I would like to be the person that ends privatization. That would be great. But a recent decision came down from federal Judge Pauly, who basically said, the issue was, because this is what the mayor's NYCHA working group is saying, is that, the under RAD tenant protections are going to follow the tenants wherever they go. Judge Pauly just ruled that actually that's not the case, that when a development converts, to a private landlord, actually tenant protections do not follow. So we thought that was like a real win. So they are going back to the table, and I don't know if that's going to end up in more litigation, but that's going to be very, very interesting. But I think, the Fulton tenants have gotten 633 petitions against any privatization. And, they believe, and I believe that, NYCHA is like, there's really up to 1 million people living in NYCHA. It's the second largest city in New York State. I think it's 1 out of 13 New Yorkers live in NYCHA. And they should have the right to self-determination. And they want to keep public housing public. And I've been screaming about this. I've been screaming at the community board. We've had protests. We protested Corey Johnson's apartment. We protested the mayor. Everywhere we've been protesting. And we just feel like they're not being listened to. And at the last community board meeting, it was interesting. I spoke. I had a friend who's an activist also spoke, but actually called the community board white colonialists, telling Black and brown people what to do, because that's really what it is. So, to me, it's disturbing. The mayor's working group has been operating in secret. I mean, now it's not, but it was operating in secret for like almost a year. I almost got arrested because a group of us wanted to be in the working group to see what was going on. And, there are police there. It's ridiculous. The working group is actually violating the open meetings law, where all sort of meetings about the disposition of public assets need to be, open and transparent. But just in general, Erik sits on the board on the working group. So, I don't know what Erik thinks, but to me, as just a regular person, it was just so disturbing to hear the tenants scream that they were against privatization and nobody was listening to them. All the elected officials were not listening to them. And, they really need a voice. And it was just really disturbing to see that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Winnie?
All right, thanks. The next question will be directed toward candidate Boghosian Murphy. This is your individual question. A significant part of your platform focuses on the environment, including air quality. Port Authority and the Manhattan Cruise Terminal, both of which are large diesel exhaust polluters, are in District 3. How would you work to make it easier to breathe in Chelsea, Midtown, and Hell's Kitchen? You have 2 minutes.
Is it a coincidence that I'm getting this on Earth Day? I love that I'm getting this question on Earth Day. And by the way, Erik, I'm glad you read my email today, my Earth Day email. You quoted all my food waste stuff. So I'm very excited. I'm teasing him, but I'm very excited. About a year and a half ago, actually, a friend of mine showed me video she took of one of the dock cruise ships at the Manhattan Cruise Terminal here on the West Side. And it was spewing out this thick black smoke. And the video, it was so bad that it looked like the video was doctored. But looking into it further, no, it was real. It was just so bad. It was this thick black smoke, but it looked like a movie. And I found out that one cruise ship docked for 1 day emits diesel exhaust the equivalent of 34,000 idling tractor trailers in 1 day. That's one cruise ship in 1 day. Then after doing a little more research and talking with the director of the Halifax port up in Canada, which works off electric power, I got the EDC, Con Ed, and others to the table last summer. And now I'm happy to say we are taking the first steps towards electric shore power on the West Side. Now, it's a project, but we have to start something, right? Before, to finish it. So baby steps. I'm also prepared to be a very strong advocate for switching our city's owned and operated vehicles to total carbon neutral and push up that timeline. And not just public vehicles, but I would like to re-energize the New York City Clean Trucks program, incentivizing private company-owned vehicles to make that switch. Port Authority is really just one idling bus after another on a continuous loop in non-COVID days. And we can fix that with strong policy. We have seen what strong policy can accomplish based on the press release the New York City Health Department put out this morning about the improvements to air quality across New York over the past decade that really can largely be traced back to regulations around heating gas and for building boilers. So unfortunately, though, our district's air is still worse than many others in Manhattan, and Port Authority and the cruise terminals are a big reason for that. So about 2 years ago, I was talking about public electric charging stations, and people laughed at the idea. Well, just earlier this year, GM announced they were ending production of all diesel and gas-powered vehicles and switching entirely to electric by 2035. Volvo is saying they're going to full electric fleet by 2030. And President Biden recently announced 500,000 electric charging stations to be placed throughout the country. So the way I figure it is I am the right candidate at the right time for our district. We are going to need someone that will push the expansion of the grid and make sure our neighborhoods get the infrastructure that will allow us to move forward on this.
Well, we like the sound of that, especially those green city vehicles. All right, and the last individual question goes to candidate Fitzpatrick. The Small Business Job Survival Act seems to be languishing in the city council since it was introduced in 2018. This bill would give small businesses a minimum 10-year lease with the right to renew, and would also prevent landlords from raising the rent because their property taxes increase. You were a small business owner. What do you think is stopping this legislation from moving forward, and how would you advance it into law?
Thanks for the question. Losing my Chelsea store after 16 years was really devastating, not just for me, but for the 20 Black and brown LGBTQ employees that worked for me for so long. When I first signed that lease in Chelsea in 2011, the rent was $24,000. In 2020, when I closed my store because I couldn't pay back the rent that was owed from our forced closures by the city, my rent was $39,000. That's not including real estate taxes. This bill was introduced in 2018. It was sponsored by 27 other council members. And I think we all know why the SBJSA didn't pass, because Corey Johnson wouldn't let it. And Corey's been in bed with and supported in his multiple campaigns by the Real Estate Board of New York, otherwise known as REBNY. And I think that we also can't forget who was right there beside him the entire time. Erik was, making $140,000 plus a year, as, by the way, the highest paid chief of staff in New York City. And I think if you ask Erik, I'm sure he'll tell you a lot about the regular lunches and dinners with John Banks, who's the chair of REBNY. If you want to change the gridlock in the city that impedes justice and well-being, we got to elect officials that have the courage to stand up for entrepreneurs, many of them who are immigrants, who provide our neighborhoods with vital services and decent jobs. Not elect the former chief of staff that had a hand in preventing the bill from passing in the first place. Corey wasn't alone. He was supported by an infrastructure and team that supported, continually put the interest of corporate power brokers ahead of the interest of New Yorkers, which has been done in this district for decades. For-profit overdevelopment for decades, a diversity of mom and pop stores, which in this district is almost extinct. I think we can all agree with that. But those mom and pops improves and extends our lives, but that diversity is being destroyed by unregulated greed. So, if you're living in this district and you're a small business owner who was forced out because of unregulated commercial rent increases, or your favorite restaurant or bar or bakery is closed, there's only one candidate here who could have prevented that from happening, but he didn't, because he didn't have the courage to do what was right. He had his time, and this city needs incorruptible strength and leadership. I'll be that strength. All
right, I hear what you're saying. Not just to be the devil's advocate, keep in mind that these are the folks you're going to have to work with if you are elected. We're running short on time, so we are going to go directly to our rapid fire question round and wrap up the evening's event with this. It's going to be a lightning round, a series of rapid fire questions with yes or no answers for our candidates. We're going to do it in alphabetical order. I'll do one set of questions. Eileen will do a second set of questions, and then we will wrap up the evening so that people can get on with the rest of their night. So we're going to pop into it now. We'll end it on a light note. Candidate Boghosian Murphy, you're first. Will you attend community board meetings when you are council member?
I'm on the community board now. So yeah, I'll keep going.
That's great. Candidate Bottcher, are you in favor of tall sliver buildings that will create shade?
Yes or no?
No.
Okay. It's very quick. Candidate Fitzpatrick, will you engage in the NYPD Build the Block and community council meetings? Okay, that's a yes.
That's yes.
Candidate Halasa, are you in favor of removing District 3's long dormant sidewalk sheds?
Is that a yes?
I'm not sure.
Oh,
Fair enough.
Say yes. Yes.
Candidate LaFargue, dogs or cats? No, the correct answer is dogs. Now the actual question. Gansevoort Beach at the West 12th Street Park, yay or nay?
Nay.
Okay, that's a nay. And candidate Schwartz, do you believe money for participatory budgeting would be better allocated for discretionary use?
No, I believe in participatory budgeting.
Okay, Eileen, take it away with the second round.
Candidate Boghosian Murphy, are you in favor of congestion pricing for New York City south of 60th Street?
With exemptions.
Yes or no?
Yes, with exemptions.
Exemptions.
Too much stress.
Candidate Bottcher, curbside composting pickup is set to return June 2021. Good or bad?
Good, and we were able to expand it by a lot in the last few years, so it's very good.
Candidate Fitzpatrick, do you support City Council Bill 2068 to provide more outdoor open space for theater performances?
100%.
Okay. Candidate Halasa, allowing seniors and disabled people to use SNAP benefits for restaurant meals, yes or no?
Yes, definitely. Yes.
Candidate LaFargue, are you in favor of the New Deal for CUNY offering free tuition to CUNY colleges for New Yorkers?
100%, yes.
Candidate Schwartz, do you support the proposed Green New Deal for New York?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Excellent. Well, we want to thank you, our candidates, for being part of this forward-thinking discussion about the post-pandemic world that we'll all have a hand in shaping. And as for the creation of tonight's event, none of it would have been possible without the skills, concern, and creativity of Carol Bernal and Sarah Adams, whose behind-the-scenes work accounts for the evening's visual panache. And we'd also like to thank their CitizensNYC colleagues, Paige Travis and Scott Young.
And finally, we thank our viewers and hope you will continue to look to us for a hyper-local perspective on election 2021. Chelsea Community News was launched 2 years ago to the day, and we still remain true to our promise: free content for all, never a paywall, never a pop-up ad.
So please take a moment to visit us at chelseacommunitynews.com and join our family of subscribers. And remember to vote in the primary election on June 22nd.
For chelseacommunitynews.com, I'm Eileen Stukane.
And I'm Winnie McCroy. Good night.